People will see through Andy Burnham very quickly. He's a more human version of Keir Starmer, and we all saw where that ended. It ended in tears and him being booted out by his own party. Andy Burnham is not prepared for the job that he's taken up today.
Robert Jenrick, are you ready to cooperate with the government in this new spirit of openness and recognise the mistakes of the past?
Well, look, we wish Andy Burnham well. It's obviously in the national interest that he succeeds, but we fear this will not end well, because I heard on the steps of Downing Street a lot of slogans and platitudes, but no plan to fix the country, which I think most people would agree is in a real mess at the moment.
But he said, join me. I mean, are you ready to join him? I mean, it's day one. Of course, there's no detailed plan yet. He says, come in and talk about this. You've got experience in homelessness. He wants to solve that. Are you ready to go and help?
Yeah, I mean, look, we all put our shoulder to the wheel. If Andy Burnham wanted our advice or support, then we're here to help in the national interest. But I do actually expect my Prime Minister to come into Downing Street with a clear plan as to what they're going to do. The whole history of our recent politics has been Prime Ministers, Conservative and Labour, entering number 10 despite having spent years coveting the position with no clear plan as to what they were going to do. And it feels very confused to me at the moment, very chaotic.
Do you want them to succeed?
Of course, I want the country to succeed.
You want the government to be a good one?
I want the country to succeed. You know, people are finding life very, very tough at the moment. Unemployment is rising. Young people, in particular, are out of work. You've got stagnating wages. Bills are going through the roof. Immigration is out of control, at least the small boats. And it was very striking, incidentally, that there was no mention of immigration on the steps of number 10. I think that Andy Burnham is not prepared for the job that he's taken up today. I mean, it's reported that he asked Keir Starmer for more time before he went into number 10 to make preparations. And the things we've heard in recent days are very jarring. He's saying that he might sign off some of the old oil and gas licenses, but not new ones. He's saying that he acknowledges there's a major problem with the cost of living, but that there's room for tax rises, and he's not ruled out the taxes that he himself has proposed in recent times. He says that there's a problem with welfare, but yet offers no solutions, and we know the Labour Party backbenchers are bitterly divided over that.
Give him a chance. I mean, he's literally been Prime Minister for a few hours.
Well, Louise Haigh, well, let me just pull you up on that. Louise Haigh, his chief advisor, or one of them, said that he spent a year scheming to get rid of Keir Starmer. He's obviously a man who has wanted to be Prime Minister for a long time, because he stood twice in the last 16 years for the job. So look, I will give him the benefit of the doubt, but I don't think the country can afford to wait months or years in order to pick itself up again.
I think that's something everyone agrees on.
I want to see 100 days in which there is radical change. That's what reform offers. He's saying that sometime later this year he'll set out a plan. That's not really good enough, considering where people are at the moment. You've got to meet people where they are, and the public at the moment feel the country's in a mess, it needs radical change, and they want people running it who've got a clear sense of direction.
I mean, you've been calling for a general election, but I don't remember you calling for a general election when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister or when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. I mean, that's just politics, isn't it?
Well, Nigel actually has been extremely consistent on these issues, and I do think it's different this time, because you've got a man. Well, let me give you my insight. I think it is different because you've got somebody coming in as our Prime Minister who wasn't even elected in the 2024 general election, and there's no recent precedent for that. This is somebody who has been elected by a tiny group of people.
Well, all MPs have. I mean, that's every MP in the Commons.
He wasn't even part of the last general election.
No, but every MP has the same mandate, don't they? It's from their local constituency.
Sure, but it's a unique situation where he's come in a by-election. He literally wasn't even there in the last general election.
Isn't this a very worrying time for you? I mean, Nigel Farage's approval ratings are going that way. He's in negative territory by a long way. Andy Burnham is the only one in positive territory.
Well, not some of the polls that I've seen.
Well, I mean, he is popular, much more popular right now than Nigel Farage.
Well, who really knows? He's just arrived. This is obviously the peak, and I suspect it's going to be all downhill from here. People will see through Andy Burnham very quickly. He's a more human version of Keir Starmer, and we all saw where that ended. It ended in tears and him being booted out by his own party. People have been saying for a long time that reform has peaked, blah, blah, blah. Reform's led the opinion polls 300 and odd times. And it was never going to be easy.
But you're in a different kind of trouble now, aren't you, over party funding and all of these investigations and police investigations into donors, which took a new development this weekend over the £1 million donation from George Cotterell's mum. Should that donation be returned? Because the police are investigating it. It's looking dodgy.
Well, you say that. Those are your words. I don't think.
Well, the Electoral Commission have referred it to the police. There's clearly concern.
Well, we don't know what the Electoral Commission or indeed anybody else will conclude. And Reform is very clear that these were perfectly legitimate donations and everything was properly reported at the time. But it feels to me that people want to chuck everything they can at Nigel Farage and Reform. They've been making these allegations for months and months now, and it hasn't by and large made any difference. People voted Reform.
Are you saying the police are part of some sort of conspiracy?
I didn't say that. I said
well, you say people are chucking everything. This is a police investigation.
Well, we don't know what the police are going to say, and I suspect that Reform will be. I'm convinced Reform will be found to have acted entirely appropriately. But my point is this: you've got to ask yourself, why are people chucking all this stuff at Reform? Why are our opponents trying to do this? Why are some of their friends in the media? I think it's because people know that Nigel represents change, the only real change.
It might just be because you broke the rules.
Everything else is just more of the same. And, what does Andy Burnham represent? Well, I think it's just Keir Starmer in a more human way. If you want real change in this country, you're going to have to vote for Nigel, rally behind Nigel Reform. That's the choice that I came to at the beginning of the year. The two old parties failed the country. People can see the state of the country at the moment, and Andy Burnham doesn't offer anything.
But this argument that people are throwing everything at you doesn't really stick, does it? Because it's a series of different authorities who are investigating a series of different allegations. I mean,
it's from all sides.
There's one involving your own donations from when you were a Conservative that has taken another twist.
Well, I've done nothing wrong with that. We have no idea. In fact, the police have confirmed that they
But it involves your wife, doesn't it, who was the lawyer for the donor to your campaign.
That really is just,
are you sure your wife did everything right?
Of course she did that. It tells you something about how desperate people are, that they start to make smears about politicians' wives.
Yeah, but she was involved in the process, in the donations process.
She wasn't involved in the slightest. You shouldn't say things like that, because it's not true.
Was she not the lawyer for the company that was donating?
She was, but she had no involvement in these donations at all. And look what's happened in recent times. The Labour Party illegally cancelled the local elections in May because they were running scared.
This is a slight deflection to.
They're not. I'm telling you what's. I've answered that. What's going on here is that people are trying to chuck everything they can at Reform. They tried to cancel the elections, and Nigel had to take the government to court to get 5.6 million people their vote. They're trying to change the law so that Brits can't give donations to Reform. They've had journalists knocking on the door of Nigel Farage's daughter's house when he's out of the country and everyone knew that he wasn't in. Look, we can see there's a pattern of behaviour here from parts of the authorities, parts of the media, and above all from our political opponents.
Would you change the law then to say that when George Cotterell was in Montenegro, he should have been allowed to be a permissible donor, and when Christopher Harborne was in Thailand and not resident in the UK, he should also have been permissible?
Well, the law as was
citizens should be allowed to donate however they like.
The law as was perfectly sensible. That British citizens, if they're on the electoral roll in the UK, then they can make donations. You've got to ask why are people doing this? They didn't do it before. On the eve of the general election, some Cayman Islands hedge fund gave £4 million to Keir Starmer's campaign at the general election. They gave the donation at a time when they knew that it wouldn't have to be reported before the election would come out months later. That was obviously...
Was it declared?
That was obviously dodgy. It came out...
It was declared, wasn't it?
Sure, but you're making the argument that a British citizen who happened to be living in Thailand couldn't make a donation, and I'm saying to you, look what our opponents have done.
No, I was just asking whether you think he should be allowed to.
I think that people should be allowed to make donations as long as they're properly reported in accordance with the law, and that's exactly what Reform has done.
I mean, the £5 million is clearly a political problem, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't it be more straightforward
you say that,
for Nigel Farage? Well, let me just ask the question. I mean, Nigel Farage has now been invited to a meeting about security. Andy Burnham has been very clear he believes MPs need proper security. He doesn't need the £5 million for security anymore.
Why do you say that?
Because he's now going to be taken much more seriously again by the authorities. And we have a new Prime Minister who's committed to security.
Well, I haven't heard Andy Burnham say that. All I've heard is this. Nigel was elected and given a degree of security. His situation actually got worse after he was elected. There was a man who came over illegally on a small boat and went on TikTok to say he was coming over to kill Nigel Farage, who was found guilty and is now in jail for doing that. Around about that time, someone in government, some committee that reports to the Home Secretary, chose to downgrade Nigel's security, and it was only after the death of Anne Widdecombe that the Home Secretary stepped in and said, "Oh, Nigel, you can have a meeting." I mean, that's a disgrace. You don't think you should give it back? That's a disgrace.
Given how politically unpopular it's been, wouldn't it be more straightforward for him to just give the money back?
I entirely understand Nigel's concern about his personal security because it's clearly well evident.
But he said he could spend it on Ferraris, not security.
That's because it was a gift which was unconditional, but he's made clear that one, if not the principal reason for it, as he sees it, is to protect his security for himself and his family. And it's very evident that he needs that. And the fact that you're even asking me this question, I think, beggars belief, given that we've seen...
Really? I mean, given how unpopular the £5 million is?
We've seen Anne Widdecombe be murdered. But my point is that, whilst I do think reform politicians are in particular danger, and Nigel above all others, if I was the Home Secretary, or indeed the Chancellor, and my opponents came to me with the kind of evidence that we've seen for Nigel, in an instant, I would offer them and their family security, because I do not want this even to be a topic of conversation in British politics. I want everyone to be able to stand for office and to feel that them and their family is safe. And it is a disgrace, really, that the Home Office and the Home Secretary, because ultimately the Home Secretary is in charge of the Home Office, downgraded Nigel's security and made him have to turn to donors or the private sector to keep himself and his family safe. That should never be the case.
I mean, just finally, if Nigel Farage loses to the bin, do you want to lead reform?
Well, one of the things that is good about being in reform is the question of who leads this party is entirely settled. Nigel is the leader.
Because Nigel owns it.
Nigel is the leader. Nigel created this party. He is this party's greatest asset, and long may that continue. And I have every confidence in the people of Clacton that when they are being so denigrated and dismissed by the Labour Party and the Conservatives that they won't even put up a candidate, that they will make the right choice and return Nigel to Parliament.
But if there is a proper by-election
after
an investigation, then the voters will have the chance to judge the investigation and Nigel Farage with all the information.
To my mind, there's no such thing as a fake election in this country. Every election is an opportunity for serious political parties to put up candidates, to make arguments, and if the Conservatives and Labour genuinely thought that Nigel is a threat to this country, is somebody that they oppose wholeheartedly, or they believed they could defeat at the ballot box, rather than through these shenanigans, they'd put up a candidate. The fact they haven't is very, very telling. The only person who is able to fix this country and has got the courage of his convictions is clearly Nigel. That's why we need not just an election in Clacton, we need a general election, so we can test that with the whole country and we can get the change that we need.
Robert Jenrick, thank you very much.
Thank you.